Remember when Christmas meant circling toys in a dog-eared catalog with a ballpoint pen, your mittens still damp from pressing against frosted department store windows? There was a time in Canada when the holidays weren't about digital wish lists or Black Friday madness. They were about paper, wool, and waiting. From coast to coast, families tuned into the same CBC specials, cracked the same mandarin oranges, and watched downtown parades that turned entire streets into wonderlands. Today we're rewinding to 15 things Canadian kids did every Christmas in the 60s. Whether you remember the weight of lead tinsel in your palm, the two-stroke whine of your uncle's ski-doo, or that orange tucked into your stocking toe, you're about to take a trip back to simpler times. Which rituals shaped your December? Let's dive in. Eaton's Parade Float. If Christmas had a starting gun, it was the Eaton's Santa Claus Parade. Launched in Toronto in 1905, by the 60s it had become a national institution. Families gathered around black and white TVs or braved the cold on Yonge Street to watch floats, marching bands, clowns, and, finally, Santa himself, waving from his sleigh. Eaton's understood spectacle. Their parade featured elaborate floats, toy soldiers 8 feet tall, fairy tale castles, dancing snowflakes on hydraulic platforms. Similar parades ran in Montreal and Winnipeg, but Toronto's was broadcast coast to coast on CBC. For kids watching in rural Alberta or Cape Breton, it felt like a message. Christmas is here. The parade was also advertising. Every float whispered, "Visit our store," and families did. After the parade, they'd flood into Eaton's flagship locations where toy departments became winter wonderlands. Wooden trains chugged on tracks, dolls blinked in glass cases, and salespeople in festive aprons handed out candy canes. But department stores began consolidating. Eaton's struggled financially through the 90s and finally collapsed in 1999. The parade survived under new sponsors, but it lost that original magic, the sense that one store could own Christmas. For 60s kids, the parade wasn't just entertainment. It was the official opening of the season, as reliable as the first snowfall. Ogilvy's Mechanical Window Elf. After supper, families bundled up and headed downtown, not to shop, just to look. Department store windows in the 60s were theater. Eaton's in Toronto, Simpson's on Queen Street, Ogilvy's in Montreal. They all competed to build the most elaborate animated displays. Kids pressed wool mittens against cold glass, breath fogging the panes. Inside the windows, mechanical elves hammered toys. Trains circled snowy villages. Bears ice-skated in jerky circles, powered by hidden motors that ticked and hummed. The displays told stories. Santa's workshop, a winter forest, a candlelit Victorian parlor. Ogilvy's Enchanted Forest in Montreal was legendary. Since 1947, they'd built miniature worlds with waterfalls, moving animals, and twinkling lights. In the 60s, kids waited in line just for a 3-minute glimpse. Parents pointed out details: a tiny axe, a mouse peeking from a log, a moon that slowly rose and set. These safaris weren't about buying. They were free, communal, and magical. Streetcars clanged past, sidewalks slushed with boot prints. Strangers smiled at each other, united by wonder. But suburbanization killed downtown. Malls offered parking, climate control, and convenience. Flagship stores closed or moved. The windows that remain are simpler, less labor-intensive. That 60s tradition, walking blocks in the cold just to see moving elves, feels impossibly quaint now. Wooden crate of Japanese mandarin oranges. Every stocking ended the same way, an orange at the toe. Not just any orange, a mandarin, small and sweet, wrapped in delicate tissue paper. Kids pulled them out Christmas morning, the peel releasing a bright citrus smell that cut through pine needles and wood smoke. This wasn't random. After World War II, Japan rebuilt its export economy partly on mandarins shipped to Canada in wooden crates. They arrived in late November and December, marketed as Christmas oranges. For post-war families, citrus in winter still felt like a luxury. Mandarins became tradition. Stockings also rattled with walnuts and hazelnuts in the shell. Kids used metal nutcrackers at the table, shells pinging into bowls. It was tactile, slow, and satisfying, a far cry from ripping open chocolate bars. The orange symbolized something deeper. In lean years, it was a guarantee. No matter what else the stocking held, there'd be that bright burst of sweetness. Parents who'd grown up during the Depression remembered when an orange was the whole gift. But by the 70s, supermarkets stocked citrus year-round. The Christmas orange lost its specialness. Stockings filled with packaged candy, small toys, and gadgets. The mandarin stayed for some families, a nod to the past. But for 60s kids, that orange wasn't filler. It was proof that Christmas morning had arrived. 1964 TV guide page Christmas Eve meant gathering around the TV, not scrolling through options. There weren't any. You watched what CBC aired, and in the 60s, that meant appointment television everyone talked about the next day. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer debuted in 1964. Canadian kids watched the stop-motion special in living rooms, lit by tree lights, the TV's glow adding a fourth light source. The animation was jerky, the songs infectious, and Rudolph's misfit story hit hard. Kids who felt different saw themselves in a reindeer with a glowing nose. A year later, A Charlie Brown Christmas arrived. Its jazz soundtrack and melancholy tone were unusual for kids' programming, but families loved it. CBC ran both specials annually, creating a shared ritual. Then came the Royal Christmas Message. Every December 25th, the Queen addressed the Commonwealth, and CBC carried it live. Families sat quietly, often in their best clothes, as Her Majesty reflected on the year. For many Canadians, especially older generations, it was a solemn, important moment that tied the nation to its British roots. Limited channels meant limited choice, but it also meant unity. Everyone watched the same shows. Kids compared notes at school. Did you see Rudolph? Did you cry during Charlie Brown? The TV was a shared campfire, and CBC was the storyteller. Telling and preparing this video took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the video. Cable fractured that unity. By the 80s, families had dozens of channels. By the 2000s, streaming meant everyone watched different things at different times. Those communal TV moments vanished, replaced by personalized cues and algorithm recommendations. Construction paper halo school gymnasiums transformed every December. Teachers hauled out plywood sets, strung tinsel garlands, and assigned roles: shepherds, angels, wise men, narrators. The Christmas concert was the event of the season. Kids rehearsed for weeks. Recorders squeaked through "Hark the Herald Angels Sing." First graders forgot their lines. Someone always cried backstage. But on performance night, grandparents filled folding chairs, cameras flashed, and local newspapers sent photographers. These weren't just school events, they were community gatherings. Small-town concerts drew half the population. Everyone knew everyone. Parents volunteered for costumes, painted backdrops, and baked cookies for intermission. The concerts were unapologetically Christian. Nativity scenes, carols, prayers. It was assumed, not questioned. Canada in the 60s was less diverse, and schools reflected that. Christmas wasn't the holidays, it was Christmas. But demographics shifted. Immigration brought new traditions. Schools adopted inclusive policies. Christmas concerts became winter concerts or holiday celebrations, or disappeared into spring musical theater. Some communities mourned the change, others welcomed it. For 60s kids, though, the gym concert was magic. The stage lights, the nervous excitement, the pride when parents clapped, it was proof you mattered in your community's story. Carol booklet. Caroling wasn't just for church choirs. Kids bundled into scarves and toques, grabbed booklets of carols, and walked through neighborhoods singing. Some went door to door. Others gathered in town squares, their voices rising into cold night air. Downtown, the Salvation Army set up red kettles. Volunteers in uniform rang bells, and shoppers dropped coins or dollar bills inside. The bells became the soundtrack of December shopping streets, cheerful and persistent. Caroling had British roots, and Canada inherited the tradition. But it thrived because towns were walkable and main streets bustled with foot traffic. Kids sang outside shops, churches, and community centers. Strangers joined in. It was impromptu, joyful, and sometimes off-key. The Salvation Army kettles were everywhere, outside Woolworths, in front of Eaton's, on courthouse steps. Kids learned generosity in small, tangible ways. A dime in the kettle, a nod from the bell ringer, the knowledge you'd helped someone. But main streets quieted. Malls moved shopping indoors. Fewer people walked downtown. Caroling became organized events at retirement homes or church parking lots. The spontaneous street corner version faded. For 60s kids, caroling wasn't performative. It was participatory. You didn't need talent, just a willingness to sing badly in the cold and maybe warm up with hot chocolate after. Church candle, half melted in Quebec and Francophone communities, Christmas Eve was structured around messe de minuit, midnight mass. Families attended church, kids dressed in their best coats despite the late hour. The service was long, solemn, and candlelit. Children nodded off in pews, waking to the organ's crescendo. After Mass came Réveillon, a feast that lasted into the early morning. Tables groaned with tourtière, meat pie, bûche de Noël, Yule log cake, pork, potatoes, and pickles. Adults drank wine and told stories. Kids ate pie and fell asleep in their chairs. The tradition had deep Catholic roots. For centuries, Quebec's social life revolved around the church calendar. Christmas wasn't just a holiday, it was a sacrament. Midnight Mass was the climax, the moment Christ's birth was remembered and celebrated. But the quiet revolution of the 1960s began shifting Quebec away from church dominance. Attendance dropped, secularization took hold. By the 70s and 80s, fewer families attended midnight Mass. Réveillon continued, but as a cultural tradition rather than a religious one. For 60s kids in Francophone homes, Christmas Eve wasn't about presents under a tree. It was about community, faith, and food shared in the small hours. The rituals were long, but they stitched families and parishes together. Handsaw with pine sap. Getting a Christmas tree in the 60s meant driving to a farm or bush lot with a handsaw. Dad picked a tree, maybe 10 feet tall, and cut it himself. The trunk was tied to the car bumper with rope, dragging half the needles off on the ride home. Post-war car ownership made this possible. Families could drive out of town, spend an afternoon in the snow, and return with a fresh tree that smelled like cold forest. Provincial forestry programs promoted local evergreens, balsam fir, white pine, spruce. Cutting your own tree was cheap and experiential. Kids helped or thought they did. The tree was imperfect, lopsided, too tall, shedding needles immediately, but it was yours. You'd chosen it, cut it, hauled it. There was pride in that. Tree lots began offering pre-cut convenience. You didn't need a saw, just a wallet. Later, condos and apartments made real trees impractical. Artificial trees offered no mess, no watering, no disposal. By the 80s, fake trees outsold real ones. For 60s kids, the smell of fresh pine was Christmas. The sap on your gloves, the needles in the carpet, the crooked top that barely fit the angel. It was messy, inconvenient, and perfect. Aluminum tree with color wheel. The 60s embraced the future, and Christmas decor reflected it. Aluminum trees became a fad, shiny, artificial, undeniably modern. Paired with a rotating color wheel lamp, they turned living rooms into space-age wonderlands. These trees were lightweight, fireproof, and reusable. They appealed to families tired of needle cleanup and watering. Department stores marketed them as sophisticated, contemporary, and safe. For a few years, they were everywhere. Bubble lights added more retro charm. Liquid-filled glass tubes heated up and bubbled like tiny lava lamps on each branch. Kids stared at them, mesmerized. Then there was tinsel, real tinsel, made from lead. Heavy, shiny, and toxic. You draped it strand by strand, trying to make the tree shimmer. It looked elegant but posed health risks, especially for kids and pets who might ingest it. By the late 60s, tastes shifted. Natural Christmas aesthetics returned. Aluminum trees became kitschy. Lead tinsel was phased out in the early 70s due to safety concerns. Bubble lights survived longer, but eventually faded. For 60s kids, these decorations represented optimism and novelty. The future looked bright, shiny, and a little weird. Christmas could be modern too. Backyard rink, plywood frame. Winter in Canada meant hockey, and hockey meant ice. Dads flooded backyards, building makeshift rinks with plywood frames and garden hoses. Kids laced up CCM or Bauer skates and played shinny until their fingers went numb. Community rinks were everywhere, municipally maintained, free, and lit by floodlights. Families skated together. Pickup games formed spontaneously. Hockey wasn't elite or expensive. It was democratic, accessible, and central to winter culture. Christmas often brought new skates or a stick. Kids tested them immediately, rushing to the nearest rink or backyard ice. Games had no rules, just joy, stick handling, racing, falling, laughing. But urban density reduced backyard space. Fewer families had the land or time to flood rinks. Organized hockey moved indoors, requiring fees, registrations, and schedules. Shinny became a nostalgia term, not a daily activity. For 60s kids, backyard rinks were freedom. No coaches, no refs, no pressure, just cold air, the scrape of blades, and the thunk of a puck against boards. Flexible flyer sled. Boxing Day wasn't about shopping in the 60s, it was about sledding. Families packed thermoses of cocoa, grabbed wooden toboggans or flexible flyer sleds, and headed to the nearest hill. Toboggans were long, flat, and could fit 6 kids in a chain. Flexible flyers had steel runners and steering bars built for speed. Kids raced, wiped out, and climbed back up for another run. Cheeks burned red. Wool socks got soaked inside rubber boots. Boxing Day's outdoor focus made sense. Shops were closed or had limited hours. Families needed something to do. Hills became community hubs. Everyone showed up, from toddlers to grandparents. But Boxing Day transformed into a retail event. Stores opened with sales. Shopping became the tradition. Liability concerns closed some public hills. Fewer families braved the cold. For 60s kids, Boxing Day hills were exhilarating. The hiss of a toboggan on packed snow, the thunk of hitting a bump, the thermos passed around at the top. It was simple, physical, and joyous. 1962, Ski-Doo Olympique Bombardier launched the Ski-Doo in 1959, and by the 60s, it was everywhere in rural Canada. Uncles, neighbors, farmers, someone always had one. Kids begged for rides, often towed on toboggans behind the machine. Snowmobiling exploded across frozen lakes and fields. It wasn't a sport yet. It was transportation, fun, and freedom. Families used ski-doos to visit neighbors, check trap lines, or just tear across open space. For kids, it was thrilling. The two-stroke engine whined, exhaust puffed blue smoke, and headlights cut through dusk. You held on tight, bouncing over drifts, laughing into the wind. But safety rules tightened. Insurance and liability concerns grew. Snowmobiling moved to groomed trails and adult-only activities. Kids lost casual access. For 60s kids, a ski-doo ride was a glimpse of adulthood, speed, power, and the wild thrill of winter unlocked by a Quebec-born machine. Christmas cracker dinner tables featured Christmas crackers, British traditions that crossed the Atlantic. Two people pulled each end, a small bang sounded, and the cracker split open. Inside, a paper crown, a joke, and a tiny prize, tape measure, puzzle, whistle. Everyone wore their crowns during dinner. The jokes were terrible, but that was the point. The prizes were useless, but kids collected them anyway. Anglo-Canadian tables leaned British. Franco-Canadian tables emphasized bûche de Noël and tourtière. Together they shaped a distinct Canadian Christmas that blended traditions from both cultures. Over time, menus diversified. Lighter desserts replaced heavy puddings. But crackers remained in many homes, a small, silly ritual that connected generations. For 60s kids, crackers were anticipation and surprise, wrapped in tissue and gunpowder. Handwritten letter to Santa kids wrote letters to Santa every December. They used their best handwriting, listed toys carefully, and promised they'd been good. Parents tucked replies into the tree or under pillows, Santa's handwriting suspiciously similar to Mom's. Local newspapers ran Dear Santa pages. Stores set up mailboxes. It was low-tech, personal, and magical. Later, Canada Post launched a national Santa letter program with the postal code H0H0H0. It became standardized and official. Digital wish lists followed. But in the 60s, Santa letters were homemade magic. Kids believed because adults participated fully, writing back, hiding evidence, keeping the secret alive. If this brought back memories you thought you'd forgotten, hit that like button. It helps us keep these stories alive. Subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive into Canadian nostalgia, from vanished candy bars to forgotten TV shows. Drop a comment telling us which Christmas tradition you miss most, or share a memory we didn't cover. Your stories matter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.